All right, good afternoon and welcome back to DrupalSouth Melbourne, day one. You're in the Drupal Development stream. And up next, we've got Lee Rowlands talking about the Experience Builder experience. On you go, Lee.
Thanks everyone for coming. There's a light right in my eyes, so I apologise if it's a bit weird. So I'm going to start with some alternate titles. We workshopped for this. The first one was my experience building the builder experience, but as you can see, that's a bit of a tongue twister. We obviously had the Hendrix reference, and I'm told this is a Frozen reference. I haven't had the torture of seeing it, so I'll take your word for it. A little bit about me. My name is Lee Rowlands. I'm LA Rowland everywhere on the internet. I've been doing Drupal development for over 16 years and PHP for nearly 25. I'm part of the core committer team, part of the security team, and it's highly likely you might have used one of the modules I maintain. But what you might not know about me is I'm really interested in front-end development. I've been a back-end developer for a large part of my career, but for the last 5 years I've been really into front-end development. So a quick session summary. We're going to talk about the goals of Experience Builder, and from here on I might call it XB just for brevity. We're going to do a demo of the current state of Experience Builder at Alpha 2, and we'll dive into some of the internals. There will be some technical content in here, but I'll try and keep it as lightweight as possible. So in terms of the goals, this video is from Larry at DrupalCon Singapore. I'm not going to go into too much detail. This is like a bit of a technical session, but I strongly recommend watching this session from him at DrupalCon Singapore. He goes into much more detail about the goals. There's a QR code there if you want. And this is mandatory watching if you expect you'll be doing Drupal in the next 12 months or beyond. Actually, sorry, that's the wrong QR code. Yeah, that's the right one. Apologies for those that got rickrolled. So some of the images I'm using here were taken from Larry's session. He kindly shared it with me. So the goals of Experience Builder is part of the Drupal CMS overarching epics, and epic number 2 there is to make building easier by guiding site builders to success with common best practice and state-of-the-art innovations. So I've highlighted 2 parts of that there. We'll talk about that a bit more later. An Experience Builder should be a low-code editor for creating content and pages, building components, and managing site design. So if you're used to something like Layout Builder or paragraphs to build your site, you're probably already doing something for creating content and pages, but these second 2 are probably things we haven't talked about in that scope for some time. You would normally require code for these, basically. Now, if you've been doing Drupal for a long time like me, you might remember various attempts at this all the way back to like Drupal 5 and 6, where we had things like the Sweaver module, where you could build a theme from inside your Drupal site. And so it's kind of trying to recapture some of that early origins of Drupal where you could do a lot without needing to open up a code editor. Under the hood, we talked about it's built on best practices and common best practices, and the common best practice that underpins the whole thing is it's built on components. So I'm sure most people are building their sites using some sort of component module where you might create buttons and cards, and then you build those up into larger pieces that end up being pages. So if you're already doing this approach, then Experience Builder is going to be exactly what you're looking for. You might be doing this formally with something like single directory components, or you might be using Pinto, and you're probably making use of some sort of design system, maybe with Storybook, which is something that I spoke about at last year's Drupal South. And nothing is changing on this front. If you work this way to build sites, then Experience Builder should be a natural fit for the way you work. I also underlined state-of-the-art innovations, and I want to go into a little bit more detail about what that means. We're being very ambitious here. We're targeting a user experience that's similar to Figma or Builder.io. So we're talking about drag and drop, like a desktop-like experience. WYSIWYG editing, real-time updates, all the things that you come to expect in like a desktop application. We're leaning on modern JavaScript technologies, and the roadmap, which here is the QR code, and I promise this is a real QR code this time. This will take you to the roadmap for Experience Builder, and this will take you to the roadmap, And it's very detailed. It includes things like multi-user concurrent editing of content. So I encourage you to check that out to see where the end goal is. Obviously, not all of that will be in the first release, but it is very ambitious, the kind of thing that should set Drupal up for the next decade. So I'm going to do a demo, and I want to note that the module is alpha stability. I'm going to just attempt to drive from over there, so bear with me. Just do a quick time check. So probably got about 10 minutes for this. So this is the Experience Builder UI. It is a very different looking Drupal to what you're used to. On the left here, we've got the layers that make up the page. So if you're used to things like Figma, you've probably seen something similar. We've also got a library of components that we can use to add to the site. And you see some of them here. If I hover over them, I can get a preview. We have the preview pane in the center of the page here, and this acts very much like Figma, so I can pan this around, I can zoom in and out, and if I head back to 100% here so you can see what I'm doing. We've also got two different viewports, so you've got the desktop viewport and a mobile viewport. At the moment, these are just hard-coded, but the expectation is when we implement it that you'll be able to add additional viewports. There's a full page preview at the top. So that will turn off all of the Experience Builder Chrome and just show here I'm looking at the full. I can switch to desktop, mobile, etc. and exit the preview. So we have a components input form. So if I go into my layers over here, I can click on this hero component. And when I click on the hero component, I get an inputs form on the side here. And I can update this in real time. And it should change the preview as I go. I can also undo that change. And there's redo support as well, obviously. And we've also got the page data settings form here. Now this is your node edit form. So it's actually integrated into the visual editor. So you've got your title and all your other common fields that you're used to seeing on the entity edit page. We've got the ability to add blocks. So as you saw in the library here, there's a mix of components, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. But there's a dynamic components drop down here, and this is where you can add things from standard blocks. So we've got the help block, for example. We have the concept of sections. So you can actually go to one of your items here and say this two-column layout contains an image in the left item and a component in the right item. I can actually click a contextual menu here and say create a section and give it a name. And what that will do is it will show up in my library under sections. And so here's one I made earlier that is like a pre-configured group of components, and I can just drag that into the page like any of the other components. We have a review button up here, so we can see that I've made some changes, and this will show me the changes that I've made. And the long-term goal for this is to integrate with workspaces. So let you stage a group of changes and publish them all at once. We've implemented that at the moment using temp store, which is the same sort of thing that Views and Layout Builder use to change things that you're editing through the site until you press save. But yeah, the intention is this will be powered by workspaces in the final product. But yeah, I can hit publish all changes here, and that will make my content live. And just to prove this isn't smoke and mirrors, here's an actual rendered entity that's made up using that. And interestingly, some of these components have stayed in them. We also have support for global regions. Now, you're going to see some bugs here because, as I said, this is alpha. But if I go into my theme and I turn on Use Experience Builder for the theme, I can configure which regions can be managed with Experience Builder. So if I drop down and hit Save Configuration, and then I jump over here, and I'm just going to reload this page, you can immediately see we've got some CSS issues, but I now have all of the global regions. And if I double-click on header, I now have a different set of components. You can also see there's a bug here with masking, but if I click on Site Branding Block, I actually get the block settings form in the sidebar here for that component, and I can, for example, turn off the site name. Turn it back on again. I'm going to turn that off because it does break some things, but that's coming soon. Just reload that. I'm just going to jump back to the main page. Reload. Okay, and so just going to show you one of the most recent features that's been shipped, and that you probably saw before we had a stateful component. If I go into the library, we have this component here named love count, and I can actually click add new here, which I give something a name. So I'm going to call this DrupalSouth demo, and this drops me into a code editor in the browser. I've got 3 tabs: JavaScript, CSS, and global CSS, and I can actually create in here components using JavaScript JSX, like using Preact. So for example, and this could go horribly wrong because I'm live coding, I can go const component equals, make it a function, give it a name prop, and I cannot see the code from here, so please yell out if you can see any bugs. Return, let's just return a H1 with the name in it, and then I've got it's telling me I need a default export, so export default component, and if I didn't type any bugs, I should see a preview, but I don't. Okay. This is working because if I jump and edit this link count one, as you saw before, yeah, we can see. So it's down to my live coding more than anything. Down the bottom here, you can see I can define the props for this component. So this component needs a name property. And if I jump back into the actual editing of the layout, you can see that if I select that component from the layers, bear with me, the edit form shows up here and exposes my prop, and I can change this to Darren, for example. And that updates in real time. So that's the demo. I'm going to jump back to the slides, and hopefully this works. Yeah. So how is this built? Well, it's quite obviously it's a decoupled app, and we have custom API controllers that we interact with Drupal via. So those controllers return JSON and store things to entities in the database and all the standard Drupal things. We have a data model that involves the structure and the values that make up the properties of the components that are stored separately, and this will allow us to support translation because we don't keep the model. Say with Layout Builder, all of your values are stored in this giant blob, and it's very difficult to do translation. So the model we've got looks a little bit like this. There's a key at the top called layout. Inside that we have regions, and I probably should apologize, we're going to see some code now. Inside components, we have list of components, and these are just identified by a type, a UID, and a node type. Inside components, we can have slots. And so this is the example that we saw before. We have the 2-column component, we have the image in the first column, and we have the light counter in the second column. And then we have a model, and this is where we store like the values that go into the model, and this will allow us to do translation. But it's actually a little bit more than that. We also have support for undo and redo, as you saw. So we actually have past, present, and future versions of that. And when you move forwards and backwards through the undo, redo history, we're simply swapping those things around. Now, one thing I wanted to demo, but I forgot, and I'm just going to switch back, is that if I click on this image component, you'll see that there's your standard media widget here. And if I add a new, looks like things have changed while I was on holidays. I've been away for a week, but I'm going to add a new image, and hopefully that works. There's an add media button here. And when I click this, I'm just getting the standard Drupal media library, and the standard Drupal Ajax is happening in the background, but this form is controlled with Ajax, with React, and this whole page is controlled with React, but we're mixing and matching existing Drupal paradigms into this. And that's important because I'm going to talk about that a bit more in the future, and if I hadn't done that in the demo, it wouldn't have made any sense. So what's under the hood? There's quite a lot of front-end technology here. We've got React, which is like Preact, but supports Internet Explorer 9, Redux Toolkit, RTK Query. If you've used something like TanStack Query or React Query before, RTK Query is the equivalent, but integrated into Redux. Redux is a state management library. It's all written in TypeScript, so we've got type checking. We're doing building and bundling with Vite. In the browser, when we type the JavaScript and we're compiling that JSX into JavaScript, we're using Speedy Web Compiler, which is a bundler, a build tool, but we're using a WASM version of it that runs in the browser. All of the UI is themed with Radix UI, which is a component library, so things like the buttons, the little drop-down contextual menus, that's all powered by Radix. And then Astro, so yeah, those components that are dynamic, they're rendered as an Astro Island, which is a web component, and then that's rehydrated with the prop values into the little islands, which are little islands of interactivity. So I guess the obvious question is, do you need to learn all of these now to work with Drupal? And the answer is no, but there's a but. Because I believe we're on the cusp of Drupal's inverse mullet phase, which is business out back, party out front. Drupal 8, believe it or not, is now 10 years old. It was released in 2015, and the back end, and there is still some legacy craft in there, but the back end is rock solid. And we've had a decade of experience building, decoupled rich applications and all sorts of things with Drupal 8. And so this has given us the example to kind of bring some of the opportunity to bring some of that stuff back into Drupal itself. And a lot of people in this room have real-world experience building Drupal sites with some of this front-end technology. And I would certainly say learning these things won't hurt your career prospects. But in terms of building sites with Experience Builder, if you're already using single directory components, you've got nothing to do. So the hero component that we saw, the image component, they're all just single directory components. And I'm going to get into a little bit of the detail about how this works under the hood. So this is an example of a single directory component for a heading component. I'm not going to go into too much detail about single directory components, but the key thing to note here is there's a props section and we define the properties. So the heading element has a text of type string, which makes up the heading. It has a style, and you can choose from primary or secondary. And it has the element, you can choose whether it's like a H1 or a H2. I just want to highlight that there's this enum entry here. Single directory components lets you specify whether it's a free text entry or you have to pick from a list, and that's what this represents here. And just with that single directory component definition, you end up with this settings form. So yeah, Drupal can infer from that, or Experience Builder rather, can infer from that what the input for that should look like and present this form to the user to be able to edit their components. So how does this work? Each of the components that we see in the library here, on this side here, are stored as a configuration entity. So there's a matching configuration entity to go with each of those. And in that, they map to a source plugin. So we had single directory component, source plugin. You also saw that there were blocks in the header, and we saw an example of a code component. But as with everything Drupal, it's just a plugin. So if you have another thing that you need to plug into Experience Builder, it'd just be a matter of creating your own source plugin. So things that we plan to add in the future are support for layout. So if we want to add support for Layout Builder, we'll need to add support for layouts. And we want to add support for things like paragraph types as well. So what happens is shape matching in Experience Builder inspects those props and tries to find an existing Drupal field type or widget that would be able to store that data. So for example, with the heading one we talked about before, this is the configuration entity that goes with the heading component in the sidebar. And we say that the element field, which was H1, H2, is equivalent to a list string field type in Drupal. So if you've worked with Drupal before, when you go into manage fields and you say, I want to add a list string, which will present the user with a series of checkboxes or drop-downs. And we also say the style is also a list string, but the text itself is plain text string. And then from there, we can also infer the allowed values, because there was an enum before for the list string, as well as the field widget. So option select, string text field. And these are all existing Drupal patterns that you're probably familiar with. So I would encourage you to think about this component config entities a little bit like manage form display for each SDC component. They basically say, for that prop in this SDC component, use this widget, use these settings. And so Experience Builder can interrogate the single directory components that are available in the enabled themes and modules and work out which ones it can infer the data types for, and it automatically creates these configuration entities for you. So if you come from, say, a layout builder world and you've used something like layout builder browser where you have to go into the UI and generate a configuration entity for each of the blocks that you want the user to be able to place so you don't end up with the sea of all blocks that is the default behavior, you'd have to configure all those manually. And one of the requirements that Larry came up with is that that should just happen. You shouldn't have to configure all these things before you can get started building. So Experience Builder tries to infer when it can, and if it can, it automatically creates it for you. If it can't, there's a report that it will show, and it says, we can't support this SDC component because, and it'll tell you the reasons why it can't support it. And there's some things that, if you think about it, that might make they kind of stand out as obvious, like we don't know how to support object shapes. If your SDC has a prop that's an object, we can't infer what the UI for that would be. So I guess the question is this just form field API? And the answer is yes, but. And the but is something called hyperscriptify. And here's a real QR code to a session from Ben Mullins from DrupalCon Portland, where he goes into greater detail about this. So this started as a JSX theme engine on Drupal.org, and it ended up in Experience Builder as the semi-coupled theme. And it's a lot of the magic sauce that kind of bridges the gap between Drupal and the React application without needing to rewrite all the things. How it works is there's a separate theme inside Experience Builder called XBStark, and it makes use of the semi-coupled theme engine. Now, if we've all been working with Drupal for 10 years, Drupal 8 that is, we might not remember back to Drupal 7 where we had multiple theme engines. In Drupal 8, Twig's kind of been the de facto theme engine, but all of that theme engine plumbing still exists, and you can actually write alternate theme engines that don't rely on Twig templates, and that's what's being used here. Now, in the semi-coupled theme, this is what the templates look like. Now, they're still using the .twig at the end of them, but that's just a carryover from some of the nuances of the way the theme system work. But inside the template, there's no markup. There's only JSON. And the JSON maps the variables that are available in that template in a standard Twig scenario. So, for example, radios.html.twig in a Twig theme has 3 variables: children, attributes, and render children. In the semi-coupled theme, we just map those from what they are in Drupal to the equivalent concept in React. And then when the theme renders, it renders this, which is a template tag, which is a HTML tag that not a lot of people know about. It's a tag that the browser will represent the elements inside it as a DOM tree, but it doesn't have any visual representation. And it's up to the implementation to work out what to do with that. So this is commonly used in things like Shadow DOM inside web components. So we render this template, and we have JavaScript that walks the tree that lives under this and identifies things that we know how to turn into React. So we have a Drupal form and a Drupal HTML fragment element, and we know how to turn those into React. But we have some standard HTML as well, which are just children of one of the other elements. We pass the props for the React components as JSON encoded strings as an attribute. And so this hyperscriptify JavaScript library that was written by Alex from Acria, it goes through, it will turn this into a DOM tree and then replace the elements that we know how to turn to React with React components. It keeps things in sync with the Ajax, like when Ajax occurs, and it also keeps things in sync with our state. And so the question probably asked is this madness? And I will openly admit that the first time I saw this, I was generally concerned that it was. But it is working well, and it supports Ajax, as I said, and we have it integrating with the Redux store. And the alternative to this is what, when we had the Pittsburgh Innovation Contest, we were a successful bidder for that, and we got a project to build a decoupled version of Layout Builder. And one of the things that we built out of that was that you effectively had to rewrite every widget or formatter that you wanted to work in React. And the final outcome of the decoupled Layout Builder bid was that it kind of fed into the requirements gathering for Larry. So he went and he spoke to agencies that were using Layout Builder, agencies that were using paragraphs. He looked at what the competitors were doing. And one of the things that was like basically a hard requirement is that you shouldn't have to rewrite all of your Drupal things that already exist in React to get buy into this system. So while this might seem like mad science, it does allow us to do that, which I think is huge. So I did mention before, briefly, paragraphs and Layout Builder, what happens to existing sites. And I might just talk a little bit more about the data model that I touched on before. You saw in the tree before we had model, which was the values, and slots, which was like the hierarchy. Things like SDC map neatly to this. You have props that are the model, and you have slots that are the slots. Layout Builder is made up of two concepts. There are layouts, which have regions, and those layouts can also have configuration. But then inside the regions, we place blocks, and in the blocks, we put fields, and the fields map to the model, but there is no equivalent of slots in Layout Builder blocks, and that's because Layout Builder doesn't support that infinite nesting that is supported in Experience Builder. And then for paragraphs, well, the fields obviously map to the model, and if you have the sites where you add nested paragraph types, you're probably using something equivalent to slots. Those paragraph types aren't really a container of data, they're more of a layout container. Where we want to get to, and this is not yet implemented, is an in-place upgrade. Because these models overlap nicely, we hope that on a site that a content editor can go to edit it, the content is still one of those older systems, and we can say to them, oh, you can upgrade and edit it in Experience Builder. And the benefits here are we don't want people to have a 2-hour update path where they're running a hook update that takes their site offline. We want people to be able to progressively move to this, and we want them to be able to do the QA on the content as they do it. We've got experience writing update hooks for content entities throughout a lot of the work that happened in 8 and 9, where we were working on adding revision support, etc. And there's still long-standing bugs in those update paths that have kind of locked people on older versions. So we hope that we can get to something like this where it's much more gradual. We could even show a report in the reports area that says you are 85% converted. People can track their progress. And I'm nearly out of time, but I just want to talk a little bit about my custom thing. So I mentioned before that we have something called a source plugin. So if you have something custom, you can write a source plugin, and that source plugin can help you to expose your thing to Experience Builder. I mentioned we've got code components, we've got SDC components, and we've got block plugins already. We've got plans for Layout Builder and paragraphs. I think in previous next we've got plans for Pinto. And with those plugins, you probably have a fork point where you have to decide how you want to build it. Things like blocks and paragraphs, they already have the concept of a UI in Drupal, so you don't need to worry about all of that prop shape matching inference stuff. But if you do have a concept that doesn't have an existing user interface, you can inherit from this unfortunately long-named generated field explicit input UX component source base, which provides all of that prop source matching, shape matching, widget reusing stuff, and that's what's being used to power both the code components and SDC components, which are completely unique in implementation, but in the fact that they don't have an existing UI, so they make use of this. And I'm going to show you some code for the very last slide. The component source plugin is pretty simple. There's about 10 or so methods on it, and if you extend from the base class, you probably only need to implement 3 or 4 of these. This has had a lot of flux to get to this point, and proving these things work with all these different flavors has been really interesting. So I realize I'm out of time, but if you're interested in all this, there's a lot of really interesting technology in the mix here. There's a lot of skill sets that you can get involved with. So yeah, join us in the Experience Builder channel on Slack. Yeah, if you've got any questions, I'm always happy to answer them in Slack. Ali Rowlands, as I said, is my username, and you can always chat with me in the hall. How long have we got?
Minute for questions. Anyone got a quick question?
You, sir.
Inline coding, usually there's a problem where, because there's no standard checking, there might be problems with the code. And when creating new components, is there a way to export the configuration so that can sit under your QA?
Yes. Sorry, I didn't go into detail on that, but the question was, is there a way that these code components can be checked by a QA? These are actually backed by a configuration entity, so they have the same deployment process as any other configuration. So what is happening in the browser when you're in the editor, in this one, sorry Toby, when we type into here, the WASM SWC behind the scenes transpiles that into JavaScript from JSX, and in this config entity we store the compiled code, and so this can just be deployed between environments, tested in staging, etc. So this, while this does appeal to people who are, say for example, someone goes into Figma, designs something up and uses Figma's tools to export. I didn't mention, but the CSS supports Tailwind. Figma has tooling for you to draw the thing and export it as Preact and it's Tailwind, so you could technically paste that directly in here, and that's the kind of the use case for the entry-level user here. We don't expect people to be writing code that aren't familiar with it, but then that's backed by a configuration entity, so you have the deployment pipelines that goes through various environments to make sure everything doesn't break things. Yeah. There's no linting for it at the moment. It's in a YAML in a configuration entity, but you could write that obviously. Yeah.
Do it more.
Max. No, it's still server generated, but the excellent question. I'll just jump over to here. This is server generated except for this component here. This is the Astro Island. We're getting deep into the weeds here, and I don't know if you can see that. I certainly can't. But somewhere in here, there's an Astro Island element, which is a web. There it is here. Yeah, so that's a web component. It has the props on it, and then that little section there gets rehydrated client side. We have long-term goals for server-side rendering, but that will be obviously limited to your hosting environment, but that's the plan, yeah.